Hey everyone, Brendan Snyder here. How are you? Thanks so much for joining me and welcome to 5 albums that have been the biggest surprise. So, while I've been a fan of all these artists that I'm going to talk about here for many years, previous albums that the bands had released over the years hadn't always hit as hard as I would have liked for them to. So, when these albums dropped and my expectations weren't all that high for them, yet they turned out to be really amazing, it was a big surprise. So join me as I run through 5 albums that have been the biggest surprise. We're going to get into that all here in just a bit. But before we start, if you're new to my channel and you haven't already hit the subscribe button, please do. Also leave a comment, hit like. All those things do help support my channel. I'd greatly appreciate it. And of course, as an added bonus, by turning on notifications, you'll never miss an episode and stay up to date on really cool things like this with 5 albums that have been the biggest surprise. So, no particular order other than I'm going to just run through it alphabetically. We're not ranking or doing anything like that. And the reason I got my Yes shirt on, because yes, I am a big fan of Yes, and a lot of the different side projects and things of that nature goes to former Yes frontman John Anderson and the band Geeks. True, this album came out in 2024, and so debut album that's recorded by John Anderson and the band Geeks. Obviously, John Anderson has a lot of solo albums and things out, but this one with his touring backing band, the band Geeks, which incidentally features Richie Castellano from Blue Oyster Cult on bass. So the sound of that bass on here that sounds just like Yes bassist, or former now Yes bassist, Chris Squire, that's Richie Castellano from Blue Oyster Cult. 9 songs on this album here, and in my opinion, totally harken back to the classic 70s era sound of Yes, even sounding more like Yes than Yes does today. I've enjoyed Yes. I like current Yes. I've liked other different side projects and things, but I have to say, when this came out here, and I didn't have high expectations. I do enjoy John Anderson's solo, but mostly just his voice. Musicality of it wasn't always up to par with what I like from Yes. So when this was coming out here, and then the silly name of the band Geeks, the what I consider to be awful album art on this, and I've heard a lot of the same from you guys, I didn't have high expectations for this thing. But I gotta say, as soon as I heard it, especially the first 2 songs on here, True Messenger and Shine On, both of those songs blew me away. I couldn't believe how classic of 70s era prog stylings of Yes this album sounds like. And it doesn't sound like it's ripping it off either. It sounds new, it sounds fresh. And so just very, very surprised that, especially this late in the game, that John Anderson could drop an album that has this much classic feel and vibe to it as his original group. Yes, put out by Frontiers Records. If you did not check this album out or you missed it, I highly recommend checking this out. This thing turned out to be so good. Big surprise, big surprise. Okay, next one was one that I did anticipate, I did want that kind of thing, but my expectations were really low because the last so many albums that this band had put out were just not at all what I wanted from them. And so when they made the return, it blew my mind. I'm talking about rock and roll band The Black Crowes, Happiness Bastards, also coming out in 2024, their 10th studio album and first in 15 years. Backside of the album actually says the name of the band, whereas the front says the title. No track listing on this, and much like previous album that we talked about, a lot of people don't think that the album art is all that. I agree. I would have at least appreciated if this had been the album cover, but making this, I have to always say, I wonder how many people know there is a new Black Crowes album out there when nothing about the front cover of it says Black Crowes, right? So that in and of itself is a shock. But the album itself, featuring three former members of the band, because this is a reunion era album of it. We got Chris Robinson and Rich Robinson from the original lineup, vocals and guitar, and Sven Pippen on bass also. So considering, like I said, that their previous albums had been more jam style and were not as rock and roll as the first two albums, it was one of those things where I enjoyed the sound. I always enjoyed hearing it for Chris Robinson's vocals, but it really was not the Black Rose that I grew up with, that I loved. And so this album, when it was, announced, okay, they're doing a reunion, they're playing some stadiums, eventually we got some new material coming. I don't know. I didn't have high hopes for the whole thing. And this has turned out to easily be as good as their first two albums. And that's a really hard thing to say, I think, or to achieve, I think, for a band to this late in the game. I think the debut album came out in 1990. And so with this being 24 years on from that, for a band to be making an album, in my opinion, easily as good as those first two albums, that is a hard task, but Black Rose have easily achieved it here. And so while we don't have a full reunion going on, doesn't matter, because the sound of this album here was so good, immediately just pulling me in, and then track after track after track. And so, you've got the singles that were dropped for this. Those were good, but sometimes that's all that's good on an album. This album here, absolutely, start to finish, has turned out to be an amazing album, a big surprise at that, and has held my interest. And a year on from the release of this, much like that John Anderson, I'm still listening to this thing. And so for me, at least, albums like this that had came out that I didn't expect to do as well, or be, for me at least, as good as some of their heyday era stuff, but then to live up to it after that, for me to keep going back to it, and every time I pull it out, continue to be as good, this is one of them. Black Rose, Happiness Bastards. All right. We're going back in time a little bit for this next one here. Those two happening to only be from last year. So this next one here, we've got Fleetwood Mac members Lindsey Buckingham and Christine McVie. Their self-titled Buckingham McVie release from 2017. And this one here is an interesting one. So debut studio album from these two coming together, but despite the album only having their two names on it, Buckingham and McVie, we actually have four former Fleetwood Mac members coming together for this. Lindsey Buckingham, Christine McVie, yes. Also John McVie on bass and Mick Fleetwood on drums. So all four of them on this album playing. The only person we're missing from the classic era lineup is Stevie Nicks. And the thing was, she didn't want to make a new Fleetwood Mac album. So they recorded this right here, which not only tells me that this is what was intended to be the next Fleetwood Mac album, but really is in all but name a Fleetwood Mac album, having four members play together. And remember, Christine McVie did not play on the last Fleetwood Mac album, which came out in 2003, Say You Will. And that one had a very sort of weird production. It was very layered and busy sounding, almost cacophonous. It was good, but it wasn't something I could really sink my teeth into, and it was really actually missing a lot of her. So the fact that she didn't play on that album, and she's on this one and has since passed away, so she will not play on another, if there ever is another Fleetwood Mac album, which I don't think there will be at this point. This here, for all intents purposes, is the final Fleetwood Mac album, in my opinion. I don't care if it came out under the Buckingham McVie name, because we have four Fleetwood Mac members from their heyday doing this, and the quality of this, the sound of this, to me, is so good. I, for one, like the eras of Mirage and Tango in the Night in the 80s, and this has a lot of that. The production is not as 80s sounding, but the style of the songs are as good as that material. And so if you loved that era, That's what a lot of this is. And I would highly recommend checking this out because this one here shocked me, literally just blowing me away. And again, has been one of those releases. And now here we are in 2025. So 7 going on 8 years on from the release of this, and I'm still loving this album. So yes, definitely one for me that has lived up to the shock, the surprise, the awe of the greatness of the album is still sounding that way 8 years on. All right, next one here is from former Police frontman Sting, The Bridge, coming out in 2021. This is his 10th solo album, and it was written during the pandemic, so you can imagine a lot of the themes lyrically and stuff on here have that with it, and it kicks off with the absolutely outstanding song Rushing Water, which in my opinion is one of his best solo songs ever, and easily standing up to some of the greatest Police style songs that he's done. This album, though, I have to say, I really noticed that while even it definitely rocks a lot more, and I think that's the initial thing that pulled me in and one of the reasons that I like it, but it rocks a lot more than typical Sting solo material. And my personal favorite album of his is Soul Cages, which is not an album that rocks, so I definitely don't need that to be the thing. But I really, really needed this and appreciated the sound of this when it came out in 2021. But what I was going to say is that I noticed that even the slower songs on here have a lot of groove and movement to them that keep them with that interest level that typical rock style songs have, even though they are not as fast paced as those rock songs. So overall, this album here maintains the previous album, 57th and 9th, but I just think it builds on it. And that album was good. That had some real big standout songs to it, but I didn't feel that the album as a whole was as cohesive and strong. Hearing this one here, this one totally steals the cake on that. It holds up all the way through. It is a better collection of songs. This album here, again, going back now on 4 years, I still pull this thing out, and every time I do, I am reminded it's just how good this album is and what a great collection of songs it is. It's currently his latest album. I do hope we are going to get something new from him, and I hope he continues in the same vein from 57th and 9th onto The Bridge to whatever the new thing is. And we are right in that earmark for one, because it had been 4 years between this and the previous, and I hope that we are now 4 years out from a new one, so maybe we're going to get one here in 2025. I can only hope and dream, because I'm loving this one still to this day. All right, and the last one that I want to talk to you guys about is Styx Crash of the Crown, also from 2021. As you can tell, there has been a resurgence in killer awesome music from classic bands in the last 5+ years or so. It's still going on, it's still happening, but it is a wonderful thing. And this album here, no different. 17th studio album from the band. It was their first in 4 years, and it followed on from the concept album, The Mission, in 2017, which is another outstanding album from the band. If I wasn't talking about this one, or they hadn't made this one, I could easily have talked about The Mission in place of this one. That's how good these two last albums are by Styx. And so while this one here is not a concept album, the idea of this was to take as many different song parts as they had and mix them all together and come up with songs that way. And I have to say that the idea of combining a bunch of different song parts into one song didn't really grab me or intrigue me when I first heard about that. So I didn't have real high expectations for this album when it was getting ready to come out. And when I first heard it, it wasn't doing a whole lot for me because it kept changing. It kept not being a complete song, in my opinion. And so I got to the end of the album, though, and by the time I got to it, I kind of started to warm up to it. And I said, you know what? I really need to hear this again. And I started it over. And I actually did that 3 times. not necessarily intentionally, but because I wanted to, which really started to prove to me how great this album actually was, that the complexity, the constantly changing parts in this actually made for a really interesting album. And so whereas I went into it not thinking very highly of it, it continued to grow. And by years in, this became my #1 album for 2021. And it's one of those albums that from start to finish, there's no filler on it, whether it's a short snippet of a song or it's a fully fleshed out song made up of multiple parts. It still is really good. And this is one of those ones that even when I'm not thinking of it and I throw this album on, it still is a really strong album that I am continuing to enjoy to this day. And just shocked again that a band like Styx, that is so late into their career, could not only churn out The Mission in 2017, but 4 years on make what I think is an even better album and one of the strongest albums in their catalog. Completely shocked by how great this album is and surprised and just absolutely loving it. And so there you go. Those are 5 albums that have been the biggest surprise to me since coming out and just loving it. And I would recommend going back, checking out, well, let's flip this one around at least and get you a front cover view there of these albums here. I'm sure there are many, many other great albums out there that were big surprises. I know of a bunch. I chopped this down to 5 to be able to talk to you about these here. But let me know your thoughts. Let me know if any of these albums were ones that shocked you when they came out, or let me know of another album that you didn't think very much of in terms of when it was announced, but as soon as you heard it, it blew you away and you were immediately a fan all over again. It was like hearing the band for the first time. That's how I feel about these 5 albums. Let me know your thoughts. All right, everyone, take care, have a good one, and I'll talk to you real soon. Bye-bye.